Hello everyone, Travel Cam here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my itinerary that I did when I was in Europe. So here we go. So first things first, I live in Lexington, Tennessee, which is midway between Nashville and Memphis, Tennessee. And I flew from Nashville to Newark, New Jersey's airport because it's usually cheaper to fly out of Nashville than it is Memphis. And then I had a few hours layover in New Jersey, and then after a few hours there I went on to my first European city and European country, Lisbon, Portugal. And so I spent a few nights there before taking my first Flixbus ride from Lisbon to Madrid, which is the capital of my fourth country, Spain. Spent a few nights in Madrid, then took my first high-speed train ride to Barcelona. Spent a few nights in Barcelona. And then took another Flixbus ride to Andorra, my fifth country, and my first micronation. So there's actually 5 micronations in Europe, and Andorra is one of them. The other 4 are Monaco, Vatican City, San Marino, and Liechtenstein. And so of course I had to plan my route to visit all 5 countries. But yeah, after Andorra I took another bus to Toulouse, which is in my 6th country, France. When I was trying to put in the Flixbus route from Andorra La Vella, which is Andorra's capital, to Toulouse, I kept getting an error, so I actually had to look up another bus company, which ended up being Andbus, which is Andorra's bus service, which links Andorra to Barcelona and Toulouse. And of course I came from Barcelona and then on to Toulouse. But after I got to Toulouse, that's when I activated my Eurail pass, which is good if you're going to be doing a lot of traveling around Europe, especially by trains. And while I was in Europe, I actually took way over 50 train rides, which definitely would have been a lot more expensive if I had paid out of pocket for all of them. The only train that I paid out of pocket for was the train from Madrid to Barcelona, because I didn't want to take a chance on my Eurail pass expiring before I got to Ireland, which was my last country of the trip. So of course I waited until I got to Toulouse before I activated the Eurail pass. But from Toulouse I went on to Marseille, where I took my first ferry boat ride to one of the islands off the coast of Marseille. Spent the day there. Unfortunately I was a little bit sunburnt whenever I came back to the mainland. Of course it's for the experience, right? But yeah, after a couple of nights in Marseille I went on to Nice, but to be honest I probably wouldn't have stopped for Nice if it wasn't for Monaco, because the hotels in Nice were much cheaper than in Monaco. But I spent 3 nights in Nice and took a day trip to Monaco. And then of course I came back to Nice, and then I went on to Italy. So I took the train from Nice back through Monaco, back into France and into Italy, where I spent 2 weeks, which is the longest I've spent in one country when I was in Europe. So my first city was Pisa, where I spent 1 night. But to be honest, if you're just there to see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, then you really don't need more than 2 or 3 hours to see the grounds. Pro tip: if you want to see Leaning Tower of Pisa without the crowds, then go early in the morning, as in before 7 a.m. because I got there at evening time and it was crowded and overpacked, full of tourists. And of course there were scammers out and about too, you know, the bracelet scammers. Of course I already did my homework before going to Europe, or I pretty much do my homework before any trip. Especially on scammers. So of course I knew to avoid the scam. But yeah, you definitely want to wake up early in the morning to see sights, not just in Pisa but also in other cities like Rome or Paris, because it seems like that's when there's less of a crowd. But speaking of Rome, Rome was my next city after Pisa, and I spent 4 or 5 nights there. And then of course saw the Colosseum and Trevi Fountain, and of course you can't miss Vatican City while you're in Rome. which was my 9th country and 3rd micronation after Monaco. So I actually went to Vatican City 3 times. The first time was on a tour, which was on a Thursday, and then the next time I went back was on a Sunday to see the Pope, and then I went back that Sunday night to see the lights at Vatican City, which of course was a very awesome experience to step inside the world's smallest country, which also has the world's largest church, St. Peter's Basilica. To be honest, I think it was one of my favorite experiences of the trip. So of course, if you go to the Vatican, then of course go there on a Sunday so you can see the Pope. That's if he's there, of course. But yeah, after Vatican City, I spent another night or 2 in Rome before heading north to Rimini. But to be honest, I probably wouldn't have stopped for Rimini if it wasn't for San Marino, which was my 10th country and 4th micronation, which to be honest is probably my favorite of the 5 micronations, just because you can see for miles and miles into Italy, and you can even see the Adriatic Sea, even though San Marino is a landlocked country. So of course, if you want the best views from a micronation, go to either San Marino or Liechtenstein. But yeah, to get to San Marino, I arrived in Rimini by train, and across from the train station there is a tobacco shop, and that's actually where you buy your bus ticket at. I can't remember what the price was, but I know it wasn't very expensive. But yeah, the tobacco shop is actually where you buy your bus ticket to and from San Marino. And then on the same side of the street is where the bus stop is, and the people inside the tobacco shop should hand you a schedule of when the bus goes back to Rimini from San Marino. So of course that was very helpful, and I believe I got on the last scheduled bus. So of course if I had missed that, then I would have had to take a very expensive taxi or Uber ride, which of course wouldn't have been a lot of fun, but thankfully I made it to the bus. But yeah, after I got back to Rimini, I spent another night or 2 there before taking another train to Venice. And the cool thing about my Airbnb in Venice is that the tram line runs right in front of the Airbnb, so all I had to do was get up and take the tram all the way to the main part of Venice, and then of course from there I walked across the canal bridges. And when I was in San Marco, I actually got to take a solo gondola ride, which of course was a very cool experience, which was another awesome experience, along with seeing the Pope in the Vatican. The gondola ride wasn't very cheap, but it's for the experience, right? But I believe the price was 150 euros, which translates to about $150, because I know euros and US dollars have about the same exchange rate. But yeah, it was a little expensive, but again, it's for the experience, right? But yeah, after 2 or 3 nights in Venice, I went on to Milan for 2 nights, mainly just to see the Milan Cathedral. And then of course I head north to Switzerland, my 11th country, and I got to visit Zurich for 2 or 3 nights before heading on to Liechtenstein, my last micronation and my 12th country. So I took the train from Zurich to Buchs, and then on to Vaduz, which was a 3-minute train ride between Buchs and Vaduz, which is the capital of Liechtenstein. But yeah, I spent 2 nights in Liechtenstein. So my Airbnb was actually in Triesenberg, so I had to take a bus from Vaduz to Triesenberg. And to be honest, I think Liechtenstein had one of my favorite transit maps, because buses pretty much go all over the country. Of course it's a small country, so of course I imagine it's pretty easy to do bus routes all over. But yeah, I was so tempted to take buses all over the country, but I only had 2 nights, and I dedicated the 1 full day to Vaduz, the capital. So of course I spent the day in Vaduz, and then the next day I went on to Austria, which was my 13th country. I got to visit Innsbruck before heading to my 14th country, Germany. So I got to visit Munich, Berlin, and Cologne. But I actually went outside the country between each city. So after Munich, I went on to Czech Republic and Poland, which were my 15th and 16th countries. For Czech Republic, I went to the capital, Prague. And then for Poland, I actually went to Auschwitz, which of course was a very sad sight to see. And then after Poland, I went back into Germany to visit Berlin for 4 or 5 nights, I believe. But yeah, I spent about 4 or 5 nights in Berlin before heading on to Denmark. Oh, and by the way, when I was in Berlin, I actually stayed in my first hostel, which was a space-themed capsule hotel type thing. But to be honest, if you're any taller than 6'4", then just be prepared to be uncomfortable, because my head was touching the wall and my feet were touching the doors. So just a heads up on that. And then of course, to be honest, I just prefer to stay in hotels than hostels. But of course, I saw where this hostel, the beds were separated. So of course, that was pretty much the main reason I stayed at this hostel, was because no one can stare at me when I'm sleeping. But yeah, after Berlin, I went on to Denmark, which was my 17th country. So I actually took the train to Odense, and then from there I took the Flixbus round trip to Billund just to visit the Lego house. And so when I was a kid, I grew up playing with Legos, and of course I had a giant collection, and I actually still collect Legos, but just super slowly, since I'm having to balance my funds between 2 expensive hobbies, travel and Lego. So of course I've definitely slowed down on the collecting, but yeah, I probably wouldn't have been able to go to Europe if I spent too much on Legos. But yeah, I made a special trip to Denmark just for Billund, to the Lego house. And after Billund, I took the Flixbus back to Odense for 1 night. Oh, by the way, I spent 1 night in Billund as well, and then went on back to Odense for 1 night before taking the train on to Hamburg, Germany for a train connection to Cologne. But that was actually the first time I've been on a train that was bad delayed, and by bad delayed I mean the train was delayed by 3 hours. So the train that I got on was supposed to stop in Cologne, and the last stop was supposed to be Munich, but Frankfurt and Munich both got cancelled on the route. But thankfully Cologne didn't, or that could have been disastrous for me since that was my stop. But thankfully my train still made it to Cologne, and I actually had my hotel in Cologne messaging me through booking.com asking me where I was, and then of course I told them that my train was being delayed. But thankfully they waited up for me, because I was really afraid that reception wasn't going to be at the hotel when I got there. But thankfully they were there. And then of course I stayed in Cologne for 2 or 3 nights, I believe. But yeah, after Cologne I went on to my 18th country, the Netherlands, and I went to Amsterdam, which is the capital. Spent 2 nights there, and then I spent 2 more nights in Brussels, Belgium, my 19th country. And then after Brussels I went on to Luxembourg, and the capital of Luxembourg is actually Luxembourg. So I went from Brussels, Belgium to Luxembourg, which I thought was cool. And the cool thing about Luxembourg is that public transportation is free. And so far, at the time of this video, Luxembourg is still the only country in the world with free public transportation, which of course I think was super cool. But unfortunately I only had 2 nights in Luxembourg, so of course I dedicated the 1 full day to the capital, Luxembourg. But after Luxembourg I went to Nancy, France for a train connection going to Paris, and I took a high-speed train to Paris, which took about 2 hours if I remember correctly. But yeah, I thought it was super crazy how fast the train went. But yeah, I made it to Paris in no time. And then I spent 4 or 5 nights in Paris, which is actually where I had more scam attempts than in any other city. So I've actually had the pen and paper scam attempt happened to me quite a few times, but of course I already did my homework before going to Europe, so of course I knew how to avoid the scam. So I was actually trying to take a video of the elevators on the Eiffel Tower, and then of course the scammers just came up to me as if I wasn't recording. So of course I just pointed the camera at the scammer since they interrupted me, just because it's fair game pretty much. But yeah, I'm not sure why I haven't uploaded those videos yet, because I actually got several videos of scammers, especially one bracelet scam in Venice. And then of course it seems like I got many of them in Paris as well as other cities. But yeah, and the scammers didn't even ruin my trip to Paris, even though of course they were annoying. But thankfully I was still able to enjoy Paris and the other cities. And then of course in terms of sights, I still got to see Eiffel Tower as well as go to the D-Day beaches. But yeah, I went with a tour to the D-Day beaches, which of course was a very fascinating sight to see. But yeah, I decided to make a day trip out of the D-Day beaches before going back to Paris for 1 or 2 more nights. And then I actually got to take the train under the English Channel to London, where I spent another 4 or 5 nights, which of course was very cool. And within the first few hours of me arriving in London, the United Kingdom became my favorite country. And then of course it's my 21st country, since Netherlands was 18, Belgium was 19, and Luxembourg was 20. So of course that makes the UK my 21st country. And my main goal for the UK was to visit all 4 constituents. But my main goal was to visit England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, which of course I was able to achieve. So I spent 4 or 5 nights in London, and that's actually where I had the closest pickpocket attempt happen. So some lady was trying to give me a rose in exchange for donations, which of course I wasn't going to give her. But then as soon as she started walking away, I noticed that my sling bag was unzipped. Thankfully she was still in my sights before I finished checking my bag to make sure nothing was stolen. And of course nothing was stolen, thankfully. But it's still a pretty scary situation, because I actually just got cash out before going sightseeing for the day. And so the zipper that had the cash in it was unzipped partially, but thankfully I checked to make sure that the cash was still there, and of course it was. But yeah, that was my closest pickpocket attempt. But thankfully no pickpockets at all so far in my travels. But yeah, after a few nights in London, I went on to Southampton for 4 hours, mainly just to see the last departure site of the Titanic. And then after Southampton, I went on to Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales. So of course London and Southampton are both in England, and then of course Cardiff is in Wales. So I spent 2 or 3 nights in Cardiff before taking the train onto Scotland, to the Scottish capital, Edinburgh, which is also where one of my favorite YouTubers is from, Dale Phillip. And I actually got to spend 2 or 3 nights in Edinburgh, which in my opinion was one of my favorite cities in the UK. Definitely a lot of cool sights in Edinburgh. But after 2 or 3 nights in Edinburgh, I went on to Liverpool for 1 night, just to catch the ferry onto Belfast, Northern Ireland. And on the ferry ride, I actually got to see Isle of Man out the window, but unfortunately I didn't visit. But yeah, I took the ferry from Liverpool to Belfast for 2 nights. And while I was in Belfast, I got to see the construction site of where the Titanic was built at. And then after Belfast, I went on to Dublin, Ireland, which was my 22nd and last country of the trip. And then of course I went on home from there. So I got to fly with JetBlue for the first time from Dublin to JFK airport, which of course were new airports for me. And I actually spent 1 night in New York City for one reason, and that reason was to see another one of my favorite YouTubers, Drew Binsky, because he had a book signing happening in New York City. And so of course I actually shortened my trip just to meet him. And then of course get my book signed, which of course was a lot of fun because I got to meet Drubinski, his family, and then of course some other like-minded travelers, which of course was a lot of fun. But I actually got to see only one site in New York City, so I told myself that if I could only see one site, it would be the World Trade Center Memorial, but I gave myself a choice between World Trade Center Memorial or Times Square, but of course I picked World Trade Center Memorial, which of course was a sad sight to see. But yeah, then of course I went on to Drubinski's book signing, and I woke up the next morning, flew from EWR, which is where I flew through to get to Europe, and then of course I went back home to Lexington, Tennessee. So there you have it. That was my itinerary that I did when I was in Europe. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I did telling you my itinerary. Let me know in the comments, what were your coolest travel experiences? I'd like to know. But anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I guess I'll see you in the next vlog. Bye bye and happy travels.